Hi, Summer. This is Sister Finch. I was just looking at the your design that you submitted for your color comp, and this design has been difficult for me to critique, and I think it doesn't quite have enough planning that's gone into it. I went back to see if I could help you by looking at some of your other thumbnails, and then I realized that you didn't submit any thumbnails for last week's assignment, and so it makes me kind of wonder and feel like maybe this was your first attempt at designing. This design was for your color comp, and it has some issues that need to be worked out probably in the planning stage. Um, and specifically, those details have to do with placements of objects within the format, establishing a clear focal point, and some value um, composition issues, value matrix. Um, and so as you look at it, so the first thing that draws my attention in this design is actually these darker shapes. And it's because they have a high value contrast to the rest of your design. So you're going to want to, the viewer's eye is naturally drawn to the area of greatest contrast. And value contrast is the first thing that it goes to and that it looks at. And so you've got these two dark value shapes that don't really seem to relate to one another, really. They just kind of look like shapes that you place at the edge of the design without anything to connect those shapes together. So they're isolated, um, and it becomes the focal point due to value contrast. And then I think what you intended was for this purple shape to be the focal point, just because it's the most saturated color. It's located within um, the golden section of the design, um, but you've also put it behind another shape which subordinates it. And so it's really confusing as a viewer to know what it is you want me to look at. And because I'm confused, I lose interest in it very quickly. And so you're going to want to play with those things and see what you can do to make these shapes connect and interact with each other a little bit better. Consider, what you're doing with your values. Do you have a light value background with dark value shapes? Um, you've and it's okay to, I mean, it's good to have light, medium, and dark, but you need to make sure that you're using that value contrast to establish a clear focal point and to guide the viewer's eye to what you want them to look at. So I would recommend actually taking this design, and if you draw it out in a thumbnail as you have it, um, and then experiment, maybe create a page of like 9 thumbnails, and and put this design in the thumbnail and experiment with what can you do to make these values play together. That sounds kind of funny, but to relate to one another a little bit better. And how can you integrate the shapes to make it feel like they are not so isolated, and that the design is working as a whole, that the viewer's eye is being guided to what to look at. Because right now it kind of bounces back and forth between these two shapes. And then it's these two shapes, because of the value contrast again, are still competing with this shape. Um, and so I kind of go back and forth, and then I go back and forth between these. And this one is very subordinated. Um, and so that one, I see last actually. And so I need you to figure out a way to make this design just work a little bit better as far as shape placement values, and then making sure that you are creating an interesting focal point, due to, again, contrast. You'd also want to consider adding some detail work to your focal points so that it becomes more interesting to look at as well. And perhaps you thought you were doing that when you put this other shape on top of it. And it's actually good to have, it's nice to have this different squiggly shape in the design, an organic shape. But because of how it's overlapping this focal point, it's actually doing more harm than good, I'm afraid. Okay, so let's just look at the rubric and see what you're meaning on the rubric. So obvious color scheme, you've got the complementary color scheme going on. Um, but you also have white on a major shape. It's okay to use a little bit of black and white on as like detail work, like line work, for instance, on your shapes, especially on your focal point shape if you want to add detail to that to make it more interesting. But you can't have black, white, gray on, as the value and color of a major shape in your design. So that would bring your grade down a little bit for that for this design. Colors are clean, not muddy. This purple is almost brown. Um, it would bring you down just a little bit more. Effective use of color saturation. This is where I'm talking about. You want to have a highly saturated color for your focal point. And that's something that I didn't mention in this design. Right now your background is very, very saturated. And that can be distracting for the viewer. It makes your background be an important element in the design when really you want your viewer to be looking at the positive shapes in the design. It doesn't mean you can't make a saturated background work, but it's difficult. So with you being a beginning designer, I would actually recommend desaturating the background and then using color saturation to guide the viewer's eye between the focal points, saving your most saturated colors for your focal point. I used emphasis to create a center of interest. And so that's where I talked about adding detail work to your focal point, making it interesting, making it creating that emphasis to create that center of interest. Right now, you're de-emphasizing the focal point by overlapping it with another shape. Okay, correct placement within the rule of thirds, within those quadrants. Yes, that is correct. One thing I want to mention with your final design, I will grade it in the orientation that it's submitted. So sometimes I have students flip their designs when they scan it in. And just keep in mind if you submit it in a portrait orientation like this, vertical, that I will grade it as if it were, as if that is the way that it was meant to be submitted. So I hope that that is in this case. Variation to create aesthetic interest. You did a really good job with using different sizes of shapes. You've got some like the size of these shapes, small, medium, large. You can even push that a little bit further. I feel like there could be a little bit more variation. It's good to have like when you're doing line work, think about thin and thick lines. Have some variation in the positive shapes that you create, but also the negative spaces. How much space is in between the lines? It'll make your design more interesting. Right now, all these lines are about the same width. And this one's a little bit skinnier, that one's a little bit thicker, but it's not noticeable enough to say that they're definitely different. That's one way to add some interest and variety to your design. Effective use of overlapping, good use of overlapping. We've already kind of talked about that. And then making sure that your craftsmanship is right where it needs to be. Your straight lines are straight, your round circles are circles. If you have to trace a cup or use a compass or a straight edge or a ruler to create those shapes. If you're having a hard time with the paint creating a straight line, I recommend using cutout shapes and layering those. That's another way to add emphasis to your focal point, is to add some dimensionality with cutout shapes and different values. So summer, that's what I have to say about this design. It's a good start. It really is a good start to your design, but I feel like it just needs a little bit more planning and application of the requirements for to meet the requirements for the final for this design. So, excuse me, I got a cough here. Maybe I'll stop the video first, but I hope that you've enjoyed this class, and I wish you the best. And let me know if you have any questions. You can text me, email me, or put a question in the discussion board. Typically, I check my, texting. I can get back to you within an hour or two, sometimes immediately. Email, it might take a day or two. And discussion boards, I check once or twice a week. Um, so just let me know if you have any questions. It's due on Friday, and I look forward to seeing your final design. All right. I really hope you've enjoyed this class, and I will talk to you later. Bye.